Okay, we're recording now, so. We're ready to go. Okay, there it is. Stop. All right.
How do you feel when you see a headline like this? Or this? If you're white, you might feel uncomfortable, guilty, or even angry. In this video, we're going to talk about why that happens and how to overcome it. Most white Americans don't realize our culture protects us from having to truly confront racial inequality, which gives us a major blind spot when it comes to understanding what the reality of systemic racism is for people of color, or how complicit we may be in their oppression. We think of racism as something bad people engage in, instead of something we are conditioned into from childhood. As a result, when indirect, unconscious, or less obvious forms of racism and discrimination are exposed for what they are, it challenges our beliefs about ourselves and our world, provoking our own blind spots when it comes to race. And more often than not, well, let's just say we don't handle it well. The phrase was invented by Robin DiAngelo, a multicultural education expert, to talk about what happens consciously and unconsciously when white Americans are confronted with challenges to white dominance. According to DiAngelo, even a minimal amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves, including the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. These behaviors wind up preserving the status quo, protecting white comfort, and therefore reinstating white dominance. White fragility is triggered by interruptions, in which white codes of discourse are broken to force a white person to confront racism, and they show up in a number of different ways. Like when anyone, white or otherwise, suggests that a white person's viewpoint is racist. When people of color talk candidly about their experiences of racism. When people of color choose not to share stories or answer questions about their racial experience. And especially whenever people of color choose not to protect the racial feelings of white people. Some other instances of racial stress include when white people are denied access to black safe spaces or black bodies. When white people are told their actions have racist impacts. When racial inclusivity gets prioritized over group membership. When double standards are exposed. When white meritocracy is challenged by exposing white privilege. Whenever white centrality is challenged by narratives in which people of color are front and center without being presented stereotypically. And finally, when a person of color holds a position of leadership. Whatever the cause, knee-jerk overreactions protect white dominance by silencing non-white voices and segregating whites from people of color. By distancing ourselves from racially stressful situations and refusing to consider other perspectives, white people take advantage of the very race privilege we claim not to have. As long as white people require conversations about race to be comfortable for us, racial equality will be a lot harder to achieve. So what do we do when our rules stand in the way of dealing constructively with racism? The answer is, we break the rules. The best way to defeat white fragility is to grow a thicker skin. Build your racial stamina by following some do's and don'ts. Don't assume you are objective or an authority on the experiences of people of color. In a racialized society, whites inevitably have a blind spot. defensive when people of color speak honestly about their experiences. Catch yourself whenever you find yourself thinking that a Black person's perspective is divisive or abusive. That's often a sign that you lack understanding. Don't recenter a conversation or narrative involving race around you or your feelings. Instead, cede the floor to your neighbors of color to amplify and learn from their perspectives. Explore the complexity of individuals you disagree with or don't understand. Your realities are totally different, and you will never breach that divide by running away from or silencing uncomfortable exchanges. Before getting angry, think about the root cause or need behind someone's emotional outburst or complaint. What you're interpreting as impoliteness or vitriol may be the best available means for them to express their experience of racism. Remember, in this society, white people are safer, included, and seen by default. The same is not true for people of color, which is why forcing them to shoulder the burden of fighting for equality, requiring them to be friendly and helpful in the face of white ignorance, and expecting them to give white people the benefit of the doubt, is not only wrong, but also makes well-meaning white people complicit in their oppression. Choosing not to be sensitive in a world that already shelters you will improve your racial resiliency, lead to better relationships with your Black and brown friends and neighbors, and most importantly, create necessary space for the equality and justice that people of color deserve.
Do you want to talk a little bit?
So
Yeah.
I think that was a good brief snapshot of some of the things that we're talking about. Although I have to call out the fact that this video was biased in itself and racist in itself, and it was unintentional. Like when they made the comment about how you should react to our, and I'm saying our because I am a person of color, emotional outburst or complaint. That's coded language, and it brings back that stereotype of the angry Black person, angry Black woman, angry Black man, or the violent Black man, the angry, well, Black man, angry woman. So that wasn't that. I think really stood out in the video. One of the other things that I think it didn't and can't cover, because it was meant to be a brief snapshot, is the way that it talked about the themes of racism was sort of still talking about those racial incidents rather than talking about it as a system, and how to disrupt the individual racial incidents, instead of thinking about it as a system of oppression. And the other thing that it left out, which I think is really important, and if there are other people that I'm talking about, please chime in, but I think is really important is the idea of intent. So it's about this sort of racial incidents that people kind of can see are racist, like touching hair and all that kind of thing. But what it doesn't talk about are those unintentional fights, and those are the ones that can do some of the most damage, because when the other person tries to say, okay, you did this or you said this to hurt me, the response is, but I didn't mean to. And that is supposed to end the conversation. So it turns the conversation into one that's about how the person of color should have received the information rather than how they did, how it hurt them. So I would say that's sort of akin to if you're thinking about your car and you drive past and you glance down for a second and you hit someone with your car. You're not going to roll down your window when that person is screaming in pain and say, I didn't mean to hit you, so you're cool, right? And then keep driving. Your intent might have been perfectly, the obviously when you're driving, your intent was to get to work or get to class or whatever, not to do anything harmful to the other person. And it's the same way when we think about these systems of repression, particularly when they're done with more coded language, like the emotional outburst or language, coded language. They didn't intend to offend me in that video, but they kind of did.
Yeah.
So those are some of my takeaways from that.
Yeah, I second and third everything.
Yeah, actually, yes, Michelle. That is the right answer. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, just saying I second and third everything you're saying. Yeah. It was interesting because some of the background stuff, like the illustrations, were doing like maybe a little better, but explain why. Yeah, like one of them where what was one of the illustrations was I think it was a black woman who said that thing you just said was racist, and the response was, "How dare you? I'm not a racist," or something like that, which is a thing we come across a lot, right? Because there's this idea that racism is racist is a thing you are or are not. And if you have decided you're not, and if you don't intend to be, therefore nothing you do is or can possibly ever be racist, and the other person takes it away, that's a them problem. Instead of acknowledging and defining it as actions that have consequences, material consequences, and determining whether or not it has a racist effect is entirely dependent on the consequence of that and how it impacts other people. Intent it doesn't matter. And because the conversation around it is not that, because we talk about racism as people who do things like dress up in KKK masks, instead of, your mom locking the door of the car every time you drive through a certain part of the neighborhood. That is really harmful in trying to promote this dialogue, I think, right? Because that's, again, the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, but I'm not a racist. I didn't mean for it to be a racist thing. And that shuts down conversation, like Dr. Willis was saying, or Letitia was saying earlier.
You're right, I hear it.
You're Asian in this car.
Letitia. It's okay. So the people of color immediately jumped in and dominated the conversation. But I'm curious to hear what you guys thought. What you guys thought about that?
I don't know. I understand the whole thing about the knee-jerk reactions because I remember I've worked in retail like the last decade of my life, and
flexibility for college.
So I remember like being a cashier like in a store, and I remember acknowledging the fact that like people would come in and go and everything, and it was fine, you say hello, and then like occasionally I'll get like probably a young black man around high school age who walks in and is not someone I would expect in that store that I'm working at, and my first thought is like, oh, here we go. And then immediately I'm like, that is the worst thing that I could like, that is so crappy of me to even like immediately think that. And I know that that's something that's like just been ingrained in me my whole life because that's kind of how my parents act, and how society does. And every time that happened, I would like stop myself. I'm like, you really need to stop doing that, and then go and like help him as an actual customer. And now thankfully I don't do that, but it's just the fact that it was so constant, so repetitive, and a constant like a mental hand slap of like, that is just not the way you should be reacting to people walking into the store at all, no matter who they are, unless they're like one of those like middle-aged white women who's like, I want to talk to your manager, and then I gotta shut that down. But like just the thought that because I always kind of viewed myself as like this person who didn't have this problem, but then it comes up in like those small things, just like a quick like, oh, here we go, this guy just walked in the store, and like that's just, oh my gosh, like that made me feel like kind of hate myself for having to think that, and then having to tell myself not to think that anymore, and like that is just not appropriate or okay, because this is just someone who's coming in to like look at the stuff and probably wants to purchase something, and there you go. I don't know.
So can I respond to you, Melissa?
Please.
To say that in that instance, you should not be hating yourself for that because A, it's not a productive emotion. It's not that person that walked to the store. And B, what you did by interrupting the conversation in your brain and shutting it down and then making your behavior to be welcoming to that person, even though that was the major reaction was the opposite, is productive. That is the right thing to do. So the problem with those conversations sometimes is that people get stuck in the guilt phase and they don't move past the guilt phase. And the guilt phase it's not going to help anyone. The other thing is when we have these conversations, a lot of times we get stuck, and this is not my thing. Dr. D'Angelo talked about it, but it's like this good, bad binary. I'm a good person, I can't be racist. Racist or bad people. That is not true. You can be a good person and be racist. As a matter of fact, you are a good person and you are racist because that's just the way the system of the United States was built. We were built on a foundation of stealing land from indigenous peoples and then stealing people from other lands to work the land that we stole from, well, not we. White people stole from indigenous people. So this country was built on that foundation. It was built on that system. And so if you think about it in a systematized way and say, okay, racism is real, I have benefited from it. That means there are structures in my life that are racist, and maybe I should think about myself as a racist, a recovering racist, I know like alcoholism. But that's not a value judgment. That's not am I a good person, am I a bad person? Should I feel guilty? Should I hate myself? Or can I love myself? That's just something to acknowledge and be aware of, and then try to change those behaviors, which is what you did. So that is exactly the right reaction. So you shouldn't get stuck in that good, bad, guilt, not guilt kind of binary, because it's not going to serve you or anyone else, really. That's all.
Yeah, that's exactly, again, my knee-jerk reaction to what I was saying was like, oh, like, thanks, that's not useful. You know, like the like self-hate guilt, you know, like, I understand because I also, you know, but the, like, hating yourself or feeling too much guilt about it is not productive. And so Letitia, oh my God. Letitia, of course, like, immediately gave voice to that because that's also what I was thinking. And, you know, I think one of my friends puts it this way, which is that you know, the first thing that pops into your head is what society has ingrained into you. And then the reaction that you have to that internally is your real reaction, is the one that's like sort of your true self that's trying to like break out of that, right? Because we often think that, you know, like the first reaction that we have is says something about me, like some deep inner truth, when I think, you know, we don't take into enough effect, especially in the U.S. and the Western world, where we take individualism to an extreme level. We don't acknowledge often enough the impact that like our societal upbringing has had on us, especially when we don't like what the effect is or we want to change it. But simply giving voice to that and saying, you know, like that's a racist reaction. It's understandable for it to happen because, you know, I live in a racist society and have been raised this way, and everyone around me, and I'm living and breathing this racism, but this is the correct reaction that I want to have, and I'm going to do this and have this action on those around me instead.
Okay, so I want to acknowledge Joy's comment in the chat and say that, yes, that is exactly true. There is a big difference between that, and it does exactly that knee-jerk reaction. That kind of, no, you can't say that to me because, you know, I'm not a racist. I'm not being racist. I'm good. So yes, that is real. Totally agree with what you're saying, and so part of the talks about issues of white fragility, and part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it in this group is because a lot of times we want to jump to, but what do we do? Like, how do we fix everything? Tell me the answer. And the answer is first to acknowledge what is going on in the world around you and in your own life and in your own mind. I'm going to go back to Melissa. The answer is to acknowledge that you had that thought, and try to fix it, and try to behave in a different way. That's the first thing to do, not the end. That's the first thing to do. And if we have that knee-jerk reaction, and then other people also have that knee-jerk reaction, when actions are called out, then we can never move forward. And the other thing that I think was really, again, going back to that story, really struck was that it wasn't a racist incident. Like, someone didn't say something racist or necessarily do something. She saw a person and something happened in her mind. It wasn't overt. And we need to understand that some of the most harmful incidents aren't overt. So I'm going to tell you an example from my point of view. I'm going to tell you two examples. One that's much more overt, and then one that's a lot less overt, and my reactions to them. So the first one, I'm not sure if I shared this with you guys before, but it was when I was teaching a fiction section, and a student came to me and wanted help with their paper. They needed their advice. I was going to be grading their paper, so they wanted to know what to write. So the student, it was a white woman, and it was a graduate class in LA. And she sits down, and she looks at me, and she says, "How do you comb your hair? Can you even comb your hair?" So that was obviously pretty overt and racist. And when I said to her that was inappropriate, she was shocked. Like, I can't ask you that? She couldn't believe, like, what? I can't say that to you? Like, no, you really can't. Both as a Black person and also as an authority figure. Do you go up to any of your other teachers and ask them about their hair? But in that instance, because it was so overt, and also because she was so shocked, I took it as a teachable moment, and I talked to her about history, because we forget that African American history is history. It's not African American history. It's United States history. So I talked to her about the history of the United States, in which depictions of Black people and their hair have been very charged, and asking about hair can be coded for talking about being ugly and being less than whatever. I told her about pickaninnies. I brought up pictures, all of those kinds of things. In my professional career, actually here at UNCG, they won't say who did these things. It happened. The same incident happened. Well, the very similar incident happened twice. That was much, much less overt, but still damaging. I was in a setting with new professionals, and we were all having lunch. And you know that there is another woman here who's done a lot of instruction. She's done a lot of instruction as an adjunct, Lori Special, and she's awesome, and I love her. But this white woman asked me, "Are you Lori Special?" I don't anything like Lori. You can look her up, and she wasn't speaking to other white people at the table for Lori, just me. Not for Lori, she wasn't mistaking the other white people at the table for other white people in the program, is what I meant to say. She was only mistaking me for the one other Black person that she knew of that was in the program. I turned that into a joke and said, "No, I'm the other one." Anyway, but it then happened kind of at the time at student graduation, where a student came up to me and asked me if I was Lori Special. And two of my colleagues, and it was a white male student. Two of my colleagues said, "Well, those pictures are really small, and they didn't notice, and, you're new here," and kind of just not defending, but explaining the actions of the student to me. I know they didn't mean anything by quiet. I knew they weren't trying to be harmful, but in that instance, it was 3 white people like banding together, explaining away something he said that actually was hurtful to me. He didn't intend it in that way at all. He wasn't trying to be racist, but to look at the only other black professor in the room who had already been introduced by name and just assume that they had to be this one other black person in the program was harmful. And then hear my coworkers try to explain it away. Maybe they thought they were helping me, but instead of asking me, "Are you okay? How do you feel?" Or leaving it alone, they chose to explain to me what this white person meant, as if I don't know that for myself, which I did. And I was not going to disrupt this moment of celebration for the student because it was a graduation. After that incident, when they walked away, my 2 coworkers, I left and I went home. And I told my family members about it, and we kind of laughed and joked and commiserated and whatever. But the reason why I bring these up is because what videos like the one that we just watched are really, it was really great, like a brief explanation, but it was less great at showing the micro insults that happen on a regular basis that people don't realize as micro insults. And I didn't say anything to my coworkers about it because in that moment and later, I didn't feel like it. I was tired. I was emotionally exhausted. So I just left the situation. I went home. And I say these things to say that my coworkers are not bad in any way. I applied to be an assistant professor here after these incidents. I love UNCG, and I know that they did not intend to do any kind of damage. But because these systems are so ingrained, and these are also good people, and also what I might consider, well, one of them, I might consider like a woke white person, someone that kind of knows what's going on, whatever. But in that instance, there was damage, and it also illustrative of the structuralness of oppression, because the reason why this student could come up to me and assume that I was this other black person is because there were only 2 of us. There's only like 2 of us in the department that anyone knows about. Really, one of us hurt because it was so new. And that is the underlying issue, the underlying problem there, that we are so underrepresented that when you see one, you assume that they have to be the one that works in the department, because there isn't anyone else. There aren't enough of us. We're not there. And so all of these things were things that were happening in my head when this student and when the new professional the first time came up to me and said, "Are you Lori Special?" So I just wanted to kind of give you an example from the perspective of a person of color of something that can be damaging but not overtly racist, even though it was, but not like we're saying something rude or mean to me, if that makes any sense.
Kind of interesting to think about, because as you were kind of going through that story, my first thought was like, oh, I can't, hold on, our computer went to sleep, sorry guys. Is like this concept of, wow, I can't believe they tried to explain that away. But then I was like, I don't know why I'm trying to act mightier than thou, because that is probably the exact same thing I would do in that situation. Because I think about like all the times, one of my closest friends from high school, Monet, was kind of that instance where she was the only black girl in all of our honors courses, all of our AP courses. And I think about various like minute situations where almost the exact same kind of exchange happened, where like things happened to her that I didn't register were like those minor aggressions towards her. To me, they were just like, oh, it's fine. I mean, it was just this thing, and it's fine. Like, I don't think they meant anything by it. And so, like, I think that's also something where you kind of have to, like, especially as those of us who are like, trying to delve deeper into this and be, like, more aware of our own actions, when we hear examples of stories like that And our first thought is like, well, I can't believe they did that. I would never do that. But then you actually think about the fact that I have exactly done something just like that, and like just being more aware of that in the moment and being able to stop yourself, I think is something that needs to be taken upon by us when like running into those situations.
Yeah, agree. And I think, like the reaction of the instinct to explain away intent and come to the defense of the person, like the student in that case with Letitia, I think that's a great example of white fragility, right? It wasn't even necessarily on the other white faculty members' defenses on their own part, but the instinct to cape for other white people and to explain away and to come to their defense and say, oh, well, this was the intent, so therefore. It's like, well, nobody asked you. Like, you didn't have to speak up on their behalf, right? The instinct is there. And they could say, oh, this is because they were a student. But the reason they're speaking up at all is because there is this, it registers somehow, right? There is an understanding, oh, yikes, right? Like, this is not great. So they felt the obligation to then speak up and come up to Letitia and say, oh, it's because this and this. Like, nobody asked you. You didn't have to do that. And that is an expression of white fragility.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Yeah, way to shut down the conversation.
I'm trying not to dominate the conversation.
Yeah, same. I'm like, I talk about this forever, but you're not here to listen to like, me and Letitia talk only.
I can.
Sorry, go ahead.
Am I close enough to the microphone? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to form in my head the best way to discuss this without it being just forever. That's the biggest, long story short-ish. Okay, so I'll try. We have had recently with the American Association of School Librarians, I know it's being recorded, I don't even care at this point. We are doing blind crowdsourcing for our incoming proposals for the AASL conference in October in the fall. And so there's been a lot of issues about this. It's new, people aren't happy with it, there's a lot going on. And there are groups of folks who have come forward and who are well-known people in the field who feel that they should be automatically accepted. This has been an ongoing conversation. Interestingly enough, all of them are white, period. And every single one of them that keep bringing this up, that is the case. So about a week ago, I've mainly just been following all of this on social media because I just am not getting involved in this. It's there. It's very present. And so there was another white professional who called them out on this. She spoke up and she said, it's amazing to me that every single person who is talking about the fact that they should be accepted, that their proposal should be automatically accepted. These leaders in the field are all Caucasian, they are all people in power, and you are not acknowledging your level of power, your level of privilege. And the stream of examples of white fragility that I can show you in print was amazing. Immediately it was, well, you need to look at and this is where it's to me it was very much the professional white fragility, because it was, you need to look at my CV and my body of work and all of my publications. I deserve to be here. And there was a nice steady stream of those types of things. And then there were the people who were, trying to see along those lines. But at the end of the day, it's still recognize the fact that it's still true. You've got this level of privilege. You still have, step aside. Let other people have a turn. Let other people, at least recognize it, at least acknowledge it. And they were not doing that at all. So what I'm throwing out is a completely different perspective, and I know it, but I throw that out there at least as a different type, or at least something else I've seen. I don't know. So I throw it out there in the conversation.
Yeah, I think this notion of fragility is definitely one that can be expanded to other things and looked at in other things, like what is it in us? What is it? What kind of knee-jerk reactions do we have, and then maybe put out into the world based on that idea, that binary idea of I'm a good person, so they must just be complaining. Or this must just be someone else's problem because I'm a good person, so it can't be me.
Well, and for them, it wasn't even I'm a good person. It was more of the what do I deserve? My work speaks for itself. It was more, yeah. It was interesting though.
And that is an idea of the systematic nature of oppression. In that maybe you do fantastic work, but what were the opportunities that you had in your life that led you to be in a space to do this kind of work that maybe other people haven't had? What were the privileges? What were the privileges that started from the moment that you were born, probably in a hospital with white administrators and white doctors and living in a good neighborhood and whatever, with schools in good neighborhoods, which are usually less diverse neighborhoods. Like it speaks to this whole thing and this whole idea of individual exceptionalism, which does just go back into the conversations of I'm here because I was good enough to be here. They're not here because they weren't. If they were as exceptional as I was, then they would be here too. But they're not. And so those are some of the problems inherent with those conversations, because it still gets back to this kind of myth of exceptionalism. That is part of what the United States is founded on. So, things are even when we do. Oh, sorry. What else is talking?
No.
Yes.
I'm just like, just
okay.
That's all.
even when we do talk about African Americans that have achieved, we still talk about it in this sense, or any race actually. We still kind of talk about it in this sense that they were exceptional enough to break through, which frankly isn't true. The people who aren't in power, whatever that underprivileged status is, the people who are not in power can't necessarily break through. We have to have some person in power, in a lot of cases in the United States, a white person in power, allow us to break through. Otherwise, we can't do it. Yeah. So unless a lot. So one of the examples that, again, it's not me. I don't want to give it to D'Angelo. Is when she talks about women's suffrage, the right to vote. Of course,
we lost the part of Letitia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We thought you totally dropped out.
Yeah, no. What I was saying is that one way to illustrate this that not me, D'Angelo was saying, is suffrage, the right for women to vote. Of course, women went out and advocated for this and all of that kind of thing, but they wouldn't have gotten the right to vote without men. Their advocacy was not going to get them the right to vote. Their advocacy was out there to finally get enough men to see, we should probably change it. Because people in power can't change it necessarily for themselves. It's the other people that have to change it. And it's the same thing with systems of racial inequality. So this idea of, if you're exceptional enough, you'll make it wherever. You'll make it to this conference, or you'll make it to here, or what. That's not necessarily the case. It's the people in power that decide who gets to break through and who doesn't. And a lot of times that is very, very, very politicized and controlled. The person that gets to break through is an acceptable example of the race or the gender or the ethnicity or the whatever. They're not just the best. They are the one that is the most palatable.
It makes to kind of think about. There was a TED Talk I watched a couple months ago, and I think her name is Anita Curtis. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure. She's one of the head curators for the Smithsonian's National African American History Museum, and she talks about how even as like cultural institutions, museums have this habit of elevating the extraordinary and not focusing on the ordinary and the people who actually like brought a lot of these things to come about. And she talks about how, like, especially when it comes to this concept of like African American history, we focus on like, okay, we had the first black woman who was a millionaire, we have, you know, Jackie Robinson, we have all these extraordinary people, but so often a lot of the progression and movement that has occurred is from the ordinary, the people who were at the bottom, who were working forward. And she's like, so as a cultural institution, we have to start looking at this fact that maybe we should stop focusing on these extraordinary stories and start focusing on these ordinary people, because the very, like, just their day-to-day lives were a huge impact that no one really recognizes. And so coming from kind of like a cultural institution viewpoint, I like really liked how she was talking about that, just this concept of like, we really need to start focusing on these smaller people that no one ever really acknowledged, who literally just lived their lives day to day, who were trying to like move forward, who didn't break through, who weren't given any of these, like, because they were too much or too something that wasn't accepted.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, if someone who, you know, is coming into this on the like younger end of the activism spectrum and, you know, looking to activist elders and that kind of thing, when you look at these examples of people who have sort of quote unquote made it, as Letitia mentioned earlier, you know, it's often possible because a white person made it possible, right? Whether it's, you know, an ally trying to advocate for this one person, because at least they can do this for one person, even if they can't do it for everyone, or, you know, because that person that they're helping to elevate, I think more often than not in some cases, make themselves palatable to the white people that they're, you know, to that culture that they're trying to break through to. So I don't know, for me, especially in the Asian American community, which has lots of issues in the United States, like, and it's really complicated. It has to do with, especially in the last 30 years, with like immigration and like what kinds of Asians are allowed in here, and therefore what makes up the Asian American population in the United States, and colorism that exists in Asia, and all of these things. But you do find a lot of people who are allying themselves with whiteness and anti-blackness, and doing that to get a leg up to ahead of like the other like people of color and the darker skinned Asians and Hmong and Cambodian, and also of course black and brown people. So yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know, comment on that Letitia brought up, because you'll get these examples of these extraordinary black, brown, Asian, whatever people of color, who are supposed to be examples of, see, if you can just be exceptional, and you know, you can do it too. But one of the things that I think Letitia talked to, I don't know if it was in the CritLib meetings, but I think it was in another LISA meeting before this started, about how, you know, like, we look at individual people of color to be the spokesperson for the entire group. So then, because you have these examples of exceptional people to point to as leaders, quote unquote, they get asked to represent the entire group, but often they've allied themselves with, at the very least, with some amount of maybe some politics respectability. So they're there because they're not going to be speaking out too much, because they're there because they're acceptable to those around them, to the group that they had to break into. So that further perpetuates the system.
And as someone who has had a lot of advantages in my life to get to where I'm at, I have to say there's also an internal tension I'm not trying to put myself up there with Jackie Robinsons and, you know, exceptional people of the world, but even when you get to any kind of position of authority or power, there is an internal tension of, why am I here? Like, why is it me? And what should I do now that I am here? Do I have a responsibility to do this? And how much of it can I do now that I am here and stay here? These conversations about the exceptional person also go on within that exceptional person themselves. That I have tensions within me because I'm not super, well, I'm clearly light-skinned for people, and I'm mixed. I'm like Black and Puerto Rican. So the way that I look physically is closer to the ideal of how it's okay for Black women to look in this society, and so there's a tension there too. Like, was I sometimes held up for positions because I look acceptable, because I look in this way? And this is a real thing. Rosa Parks was chosen to do the whole bus thing partially because of what she looked like. That she was an acceptable looking woman. She didn't. Rosa Parks, if you don't know, she didn't really just, say, I'm going to sit at the front of the bus as an individual act of a rebellion or a civil, whatever.
Or she was hired to teach it in elementary and high schools even. She was just
that is.
She didn't want to get up.
Right. None of that is true. She was chosen. This was a political protest that was devised and structured, planned, and she was chosen to be the first person to carry it out, or one of the first people to carry it out, based on her respectability and the way that she looked. Mm-hmm. So that's also, I'm noticing that there's like 2 minutes left, and I wanted to say that this is a really, really deep topic, and part of the reason why I thought it was important to bring it up is because it underpins so many conversations that we would be having in critical librarianship. It underpins everything in the United States. So in order to really move forward with these conversations, I think it's important to kind of step back and understand this historically speaking. So there are several resources that I'm going to start bombing you in chat with. So that link that I just put in there, that is an hour and 23 minutes, really too long for this this session. So thank you, Tori, for finding a shorter one. An hour and 23 minutes book talk that Robin DiAngelo gave at the Seattle Central Library about her book, White Fragility, that recently came out. And it's a really, it delves more deeply into some of these issues that we're talking about, and I strongly encourage it because, again, it's foundational to moving this work forward. The other thing that I'm about to bomb you with is her website, because I do know that even though I said working on yourself is part of working on this, this is her website. So, Michelle, you don't necessarily need to read the book in order to understand the book talk, but one of the things that I was going to say is that if you want to read the book, it is available as an ebook at Jackson Library. What? So you can read the book at Jackson Library, but she just goes, yeah, well, we'll know for next time because there's going to be another meeting in May, I asked. So it is there. It's also available as an audiobook if you're willing to pay for it and need to listen. A lot of times I have to read, so I do audiobooks. But it is there, freely available. Checked this morning at Jackson Library. Checked it out, so you can get it there and read the book. The book talk you can watch before or after. It takes that 6 minutes and it expands each one of the concepts we're trying to briefly talk about, so you can get a little bit deeper into it, and she offers a really good metaphor of a dock and the pillars that support the dock. You'll understand if you watch it. And then so the thing up there is her website, and on her website you'll notice that there are pages, one called media. So if you don't still have later, if you want to look at more stuff that she's talked about or said in Clean Up Talk. It's on the media page. And resources, and some of these resources provide step-by-step, like, here are some things you can do kind of things. And there's also reader's guide. If you want to read White Fragilities, there's a free White Fragility reader's guide on that page. And then one of the things that I looked at before today in her like general resources thing is this wonderful article called 100 Ways to Be an Ally. It's funny and honest and whatever. Or 100 Ways to Be a White Ally. So there are some resources there for the people actually talking through it, like 24 books for anti-racist teachers. So there's, I know a lot of you want answers, like give me something to do. So there's those resources there. And the last thing, sorry, I took over time and I was saying I was trying to, the last thing that I want to put in that is actually,
Did you say that you were going to send me that via email? Because I'm here, but I'm not in there.
Yeah, I will do that as well, or I will send them to Lissa. I don't know how they want to.
Yeah, I can.
But the last thing I'm putting in.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Why are you apologizing?
Well,
stop apologizing, Tori.
That's rude.
It's okay. Well, because it's hard not to do that in chat. I mean, in virtual.
Yeah, I hate it when I have to do that, and yeah. But I was just going to say that I'm actually putting it on the UNCG resource page, and I can send that out to everyone, and we'll actually send it out with the recording as well, so it will be on the listserv that Greg sends out, but I can send everybody who is here as well the link, because I'm linking the video and her website as like the list of resources that we talked about. And I'm also adding that we'll ask, like, I personally wanted everybody to, Letitia, when you brought that video up, I think it would be a great idea to continue this because it is such a deep conversation for May, and it will be in my WebEx room again, sorry. But I think it would be good to view that video. It's on our own time, and then come back, and like that will be the homework or whatever that we send people home with, to just view that video and then be ready to talk about it the next time.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome.
That sounds great.
The last thing I'm putting, you might not want to add this to your resources, but the last video I'm putting, it's funny. I don't know if any of you guys have seen White Fragility in the Workplace by Newsbroke, but it's hilarious. It's done as like this like one of those cheesy sensitivity training videos, but it's also really illustrative of what we're talking about when we talk about that kind of knee-jerk reaction. So if you're like, I'm still not really sure what you mean. It actually has some really good examples in there, but in a funny, humorous way. So after you've watched, an hour and 23 minutes and feel depressed and sad, you might want to watch a 5-minute video that's actually pretty funny. Yeah, it's funny, but it's also really a good video. So, yes, and I love that idea to come back later and talk about it. And if you want to think through some of the questions that you might want to ask and whatever when we come back later, that guide that I was saying is on the Robin DiAngelo's web page. That's the White Fragility Reader's Guide. Even if you're not reading the whole book, in there are some like questions to think about or to ask yourself, or that kind of thing. The on facilitating section is kind of good because it has examples and questions, and then kind of response techniques. So you might want to also check that particular. I'm going to put a link to that specific page out when you're thinking through it, so we can come back with that. There we go. Okay, I'm done with the links. Sorry.
No, that's
over.
Yeah, I guess I have one last thing that I wanted to mention since we're talking about white fragility, which is like the response, right? We talked about microaggressions and things that happen, but white fragility is the response to that, and again the knee jerk, well, I didn't intend to, or you're taking that the wrong way, or it's not as serious as you think it is. And coming, to your own or other people's defenses. And there's this comment that this person left on, it was several years ago. It was on John Scalzi's blog, specifically in reference to a thing that happened with like sexual harassment at a ReaderCon convention. But this comment that they left, I think it's really breaks things down really simply, and is applicable to, responses to all the isms, which is, if you step on my foot, you need to get off my foot. If you step on my foot without meaning to, you still need to get off my foot. If you step on my foot without realizing it, and I say, ow, my foot is hurting, you need to get off my foot. I don't care why you did it, right? If everyone in your culture steps on feet, your culture's horrible and you need to get off my foot. It's a terrible foot-stepping disease, and it makes you unaware that you're stepping on feet. You still need to get off my foot. If an event has rules designed to keep people from stepping on feet, you need to follow them. If you think that an event with these rules, you still won't be able to avoid stepping on people's feet, you need to remove yourself from the event until you can work something out. If you are a serial footstepper and you feel you're entitled to step on people's feet just because you're awesome and they're not really people anyway, you're a bad person, and you don't get to use any of those excuses, limited as they are. And moreover, you need to get off the foot. So see, that's why I don't get the focus on classifying, and again, this was in response to sexual harassment, on classifying harassers and figuring out all their motivations, because the victims are just as harassed anyway. And I think it's a really simple example to give to people who say, oh, but I didn't mean to do this, and this is why I said this, and well, maybe they only intended it this way, and it's not that bad because of all of these circumstantial things. It's like, no. It's always appropriate for a person to say, ow, you're stepping on my foot, and the only reasonable reaction to it is, I'm sorry, and then get off the foot. That's the thing that we can agree on,
That's
right?
Awesome.
And it's a very, very simple way to talk about, these kinds of reactions to things. It's just, it breaks it down to the simplest level, which is at the very least, it's rude. You're hurting me. My reaction is understandable and a correct one to have. I don't care why you did it. I don't care, that even if you didn't know, we've all done that, right? Accidentally stepped on someone's foot. What's the response? To keep standing there and explain why we didn't know? No, you get off the foot. Yeah. So that's just a thing that I wanted to bring up, because I know often when we talk about conversations of white fragility, and especially if we're bringing it up with other people and not necessarily even only white people, right, who don't get why the emphasis is on this and why this language has made it into the popular social consciousness and popular lexicon, and they think that it's, a bunch of BS and political correctness and taking things too seriously. I think it's it's an example that I've used many times that I think helps keep the conversation on track.
And here is the link to all of those resources that I just published on the site. So that's a place where you find everything that they just dumped in the chat for us. And
Thank you, Tori.
but yeah, I think just to wrap everything up, I think this has been a great learning experience, because for me, even seeing those, seeing that video, I never would have known from my perspective, obviously, that was maybe not the best example to use. And I think it's always great to kind of just shut up for a little bit and just see from other people's different perspectives and points of view. And I think I could be wrong, but my personal opinion is that as long as I am a white person and a white woman, I'm never going to be, I'm never going to have a gold star that says I'm good at not being racist. It's just always going to be a thing. And being okay with that is, I think the binaries that Robin DiAngelo talks about was very eye-opening for me, just because that is so, what I see with people in my own family and my own,
I love a Pete.
Oh, man, it's just so what I see. And when I call them out in our own personal spaces, because sure, this is a white person over here who has championed all of these successful people of color, but when we're alone, they're laughing at jokes that they wouldn't laugh at in public. And so it's kind of And so to me, when she introduced those binaries, it was she was saying something that I always knew was real, but I could never have the vocabulary for. And I was that is it, because people, in my experience, it is like you're bad if I call you out on the fact that you even laughed at that racist joke. Well, I'm not bad. That was just funny, or and it's just like, but you have to be on a different level. You can't just, when are they like people of color don't get to turn this off. So why do you get to? And I could be wrong about all of this because I'm still learning, and I just really appreciate this.
You are not wrong, Tori.
Yeah. And, like, we're specifically talking about white fragility, but, I mean, the same is true for, like, all of the isms, right? Like, I'm an able-bodied person, I'm cis, all of these things, like, I'm also, we also exist in a horrifically ableist society, right, in a transphobic society, queermisia, all of these things that we're constantly having to fight against. Even if you belong to those groups, you are not exempt from being impacted by this, and this it impacts, your self-esteem and how you think about other people, because you might think of yourself as an exceptional one that tries hard and pulls themselves up by their bootstraps, but those other ones of that group, they're just not trying as hard, or they're leaning too hard in a stereotype or whatever, right? So even if it's a group that you belong to, that doesn't necessarily make you exempt from it, and it's constant work. It's a constant process, and it will never end. Which, like, sounds in a way, like kind of hopeless, because we like to think of things as having a finish line, and you do the work and you're done and gold star, right? But it's just not how it goes,
And I think that's the binary part. Like, that's what people want. They want to say, they want to be told they're either good or bad at it, and, like, that will give them a place to be, but then they want to eventually be not a racist. They eventually want to get to a point where, because we all want to be accepted and we all want to, have that. But when we find out that there's something fundamentally wrong with our society and that it's ingrained in all of us, I think the binaries are like, again, it provides an overload that, like, a lot of people are not able to deal with.
Right.
And I think it's just so important that we're able to even come into a space and just have these conversations and nobody gets, like, I don't know. It's just, I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
We appreciate you too, Tori.
It's warm fuzzies, guys. Warm fuzzies.
Well, I think everyone who was willing to, talk about their experiences and speak up, because again, like, it can be really, like, we want this space to be a place where you can, like, talk about these scenarios where, you might not want to admit, like, in public, say, oh, I did this thing, which does not paint me in a great light, but I need to talk about it so that we can dissect it. And so this is a space where we can do that, right? Whereas you wouldn't want to do it maybe on Twitter, so you can be dragged to
That's so good. We went long, and my mom is now calling me.
Like, who's ringing the dinner bell? What does that sound?
Sorry, it's my mom. It's like, it's supposed to be over at 12. But before I feel like what Deborah said and everyone said, so we should also say thank you, Melissa, for sharing the story that you shared in the beginning.
Thank you, Melissa.
So we appreciate you too.
All right. Yeah, well, I guess, like, time is over. I don't want to keep anyone who can't stay.
Yeah. Clearly, I have to go call my mom back.
Yeah. Also, quick shout out to there's an event happening with the, like, SCUA is doing an event in town today for the rest of the day, and I've completely blanked on what it's called, and I even brought it up.
It's Triad History Day.
Yeah, Triad.
Yeah, the Greensboro History Museum downtown, 10 to 3. Is it 3? I don't remember. Also, International Fest is happening on campus now, too.
Ooh, everything's
Which
happening.
is, like, super cool. If no one's ever been and you're in the area, I definitely recommend it.
Very busy today, because today is also Destination UNCG, so all of the accepted freshmen are here on campus as well.
So maybe just don't come to campus.
And iFest. Well, I mean, iFest is here too, so that's pretty awesome. But yeah, I drove up and I went, there's a whole lot of people on Spring Garden.
Yeah, I'm driving back to camp, like, UNCG. It's going to be 10 hours. I'm going to love it. But I did find a book, if you guys are interested, that, I'm going to listen to it on the way, and I'll put it I found it on Libby, and it says, hold on, I'll find the link on Amazon. But it's called I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown. And it sounds pretty good. So I'm going to share that as well.
All right.
Thank you.
So,
Call your mom, Letitia.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I'm headed upstairs to write on a chapter. I've put it off long enough. I keep playing around, I'll put it off some more.
I'm going to stop recording, just so you know.